Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 24th meeting of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. I am President Catherine Stott. We are delighted to have you here. I am in one piece for those of you who asked or were worried about the ski trip. All in one piece. So we're good. And so is my son. So we're both good. I'm going to lead the Pledge of Allegiance and four-way test today. We need people to sign up to give a moment of inspiration. So if you would like to do so, you can do that by signing up in the lobby or online. So if you would stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? All right, so now greet your fellow Rotarians. Either wave or fist bump, whatever you're comfortable with. We have a warm and welcoming group today. I love it. And that is perfect because we welcome 4 guests today. So if our guests would stand as I introduce you, and you can see their full names and their organization they're affiliated with on the PowerPoint. Emily is a guest of Matt Busick. Welcome, Emily. Rochelle is also a guest of Matt Busick. Welcome. Ryan, this is a big guest table. Love it. Ryan is a guest of Colleen Rogers Messenger. Welcome, Ryan. And Jennifer is a guest of the club. Welcome, Jennifer. We are delighted that each of you could join us today. And if you have somebody in mind who you think would like to join us, please invite them for an upcoming meeting. I will go through the next couple speakers at the end of our program. So particularly if somebody you think would be interested in one of those, make sure to reach out and invite them. And now we have another new member or introduction. So Eric, if you would stand while I introduce you. And I was also getting all giddy about this one too, because he is a fellow skier. Love it. Not that this is all about me, except, for another couple months, I get the mic most of the time. So you've got a free day. What would we find you doing? He says, my most recent free day was spent skiing hot laps at Seven Oaks Recreation in Boone. It was reminiscent of my 12-year stint in Colorado, where I lived prior to moving to Des Moines in 2019. I love to be outdoors. Skiing, golfing, camping, hiking, fishing, boating, and even yard work are all things I can be found doing on a day off. It's my kind of person. Where in the world have you traveled and can't wait to get back to? Greece. My wife and I visited Greece in 2010 and fell in love with the rich history and delicious cuisine. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? Eric says, focus on what you can control, the rest will work itself out. Excellent advice. What skill or talent do you possess that might surprise or delight other people? I want this. The ability to remain calm in stressful situations. We can all use a little more of that, I think. All right, and you're joining Rotary. What can't you wait to tell your friends about our organization? The welcoming environment full of high caliber people. Well, welcome, Eric. We're delighted you picked Rotary Club. And now Randy Worth has a special announcement about wheels. Come on up, Randy.
not to be confused with a moment of inspiration. So the Wheels Fellowship will once again tour the Danny Albaugh car collection tomorrow afternoon, 3 to 4:30. We were capped on our attendance. It appears that members that have signed up and their sign-up sheets, if there's not one on your table, see me if you haven't signed up already. The different ones have signed up. They've also asked about guests, and the members and guests so far are under our threshold, so we're good to go. Please remember, it's an Albaugh requirement, not mine, that you have a mask. It was made very clear that we had to have that, so okay, it's worth getting into. The address is 1525 Northeast 36th in Ankeny. For those of you that have to use your GPS, for those of us that turn at the Red Barn and go here and go there, go north on 35, get off at 36th Street, stay in the left lane when you make your turn, go under the underpass, past all the the entrance exit stoplights, first driveway on the left, hang a left, looks like you're going into a park, which you are, and go in the back, look for me, I'll be standing out there, but if you don't see me, look on the barn where the Chevy sign is, and there you go. Okay. For those that haven't been there, there's 150 cars, gas memorabilia, pedal cars, all kinds of stuff. We have an hour and a half, and it will take all, just if the kid in the candy shop for the summer making return trips, it's well worth your time. Anyway, hope you enjoy, and if you haven't signed up, you can see me later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. And now Graham Gillette is going to introduce our program. Graham.
Thanks, Catherine. I don't think I'll let a moment of inspiration go by, so I'm going to take a personal moment here this morning. Like many of you, I started my day, I turned on the TV and I saw pictures of the atrocities in Ukraine. And they're hard to watch. And it reminds me of all the things that seem to go wrong these days. I think of the divisiveness in our country. I think about how it seems like we spend more time finding that which divides us than celebrating that's what could unite us, and finding a way to be better, to build a better world. And I turned back to my TV, and there was this moment in Ukraine being broadcast, and there were these guys that had brought loudspeakers to the side of the road as Russian troops were rolling through, and they were playing the old Bon Jovi hit, "It's My Life," as loud as they could as these Russian troops came by. What a powerful moment, right? What it must feel to be John Bon Jovi to hear your song played in that setting. But I mean, this is the one thing they could do, is scream at the top of their lungs and sing along with "It's My Life." And it made me think about my opportunity to come here to Rotary today, and what we do every day with our four-way test by saying to each other and joining together to do our small part every day to make the world a better place. And if we do that, if we stick to what the four-way test tells us and what the Rotary Creed tells us, we can make the world a better place. And that's the thing that maybe makes it easy for all of us, or a little bit easier for all of us, to turn on the TV news and see what's happening in Ukraine. And then dig deep and think, what can I do to make the world a better place? Maybe it's a way to contribute some money to Ukraine causes. Maybe it's a way to look at our neighbors and look at our neighbors in our neighborhood. And as I said before, look less to what divides us and more at what unites us. And so that's my word of inspiration today. So along those lines, we come today to talk about water. And Catherine and Ted and I were talking about this issue. We don't think about water much. We have a great luxury to live in Des Moines, Iowa, where we turn on the tap every day and we have clean water and we don't pay much money for it, and we just know it's going to be there all the time. And as Ted points out, a person who spent his entire career in this industry, we in the industry are kind of our worst enemies. We've stayed quiet for a long period of time. We do our job producing water and doing our job so that when you turn on the tap, you have that. But as a result, people don't think about water until there's a problem, and then it can often be too late. For many years, those of us at Des Moines Waterworks, and for those of you who don't know, I've served on the Des Moines Waterworks for almost 12 years. About half that time I've served as chairperson, and it's great public service. I really enjoy being a part of Des Moines Waterworks. But for many of those years, or really all of them since I've been on the board, we've been talking about regional governance. And Ted will go into this into more detail, but Des Moines Waterworks has operated as a producer of water for well over 100 years in Des Moines Waterworks. 90-some years ago, Des Moines Waterworks began being a wholesaler of water, selling water to Urbandale was their first customer, and now acts as a wholesaler for most or almost all of the communities in central Iowa. 60% of the water that Des Moines Waterworks produces is sold throughout the suburban entities. So this discussion about regionalizing water, creating a regional governance of water, is a very important thing. And it's important as a board member, but also as a ratepayer. The number one reason for me to be behind regionalization is protecting that vital source, that vital water resource. As we face climate change and we face other threats in the future, whether it's pollution in our waterways or other things, the scarcity of water is something very real that we have to face. It doesn't make sense that every community should go that alone. By coming together, pooling our resources, planning for the future together, building a resilient system so that if one source of water is threatened, we have another one to turn to, that just makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense from a financial standpoint, but it really makes perfect sense when thinking about facing those struggles in the future so that you're never faced with that moment where you turn on the tap and you either doubt the water or it's not there. And so I'm going to let Ted explain to you what's happening with regional water. We have a plan. Des Moines Waterworks has developed an agreement which has been released throughout the community, and we're in this comment period now. It is our hope that the comments will be received. We'll continue to have discussions up until June, with the goal being that communities throughout central Iowa, all of the communities that Ted will list in his presentation, will begin signing that agreement in September of this year, with a regional board being seated in the first part of 2023. And that regional board would govern water production in central Iowa for the future. If you are a resident of Des Moines, your bill will continue to come from Des Moines Waterworks. If you live in Clive, it will come from Clive. Those things will remain the same, but we will join together in governance to plan for the future. And I think not only is it a financial benefit, but it is this is the best step forward for us to protect that resource going forward. So I'm going to let Ted take over. Ted is the CEO and General Manager of Des Moines Waterworks and has been for a couple of years. I don't exactly know when Ted ascended that position, but he spent most of his career at Des Moines Waterworks. He's been there for 30 years after getting a degree at Iowa State University. Feel free to move. Ted came into this position obviously with great experience at Des Moines Waterworks, and is leading us through this step forward into regionalization. And I think you'll enjoy his presentation today. Join me in welcoming Ted Corbin.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you all for the opportunity to share a little bit today some of our vision for Central Iowa Waterworks, or what would be a regional governance system for drinking water production in the Des Moines metro area. And as Graham said, I have been at the Waterworks for more than 30 years. It's a little hard for me to believe, but I have seen numerous swings at the concept of regional governance. And I'm excited to share with you today why I think we're going to hit the ball this time. And I think we're probably going to hit a home run if we hit the ball. There are some things that are different now. Now is the time. And I think you'll see that we have real potential to create something powerful for the community. So what I hope to do is make this work. No, the green light is on.
All right. Well.
You can help me, Kitty. What I hope to do here today is just give you a little bit of background and talk a little bit about how we got to this point where we think that now we can be successful. I want to talk a little bit in terms of specifics, what Central Iowa Waterworks would look like. Maybe as importantly, I want to talk a little bit about what it won't look like. And then I want to touch on, kind of punctuate some of the timeline things that Graham talked about. So with that as our roadmap here, Kitty, if you could give me the next slide, please. As Graham mentioned, Des Moines Waterworks has been an independent municipal utility for more than 100 years, and we have been wholesaling drinking water for almost 90 years. Urbandale was the first customer, as Graham mentioned, and then over the years, most of the communities in Central Iowa started purchasing all of their drinking water, at least a portion of their drinking water from Des Moines Waterworks. So that by the late 1980s, we were serving about 80% of the metro's population. And then in 1993, we had a flood, and 80% of the metro's population was without water, and that was a problem. So after the floods in 1993, the metro communities came together, and they all agreed that it would be prudent to develop a more resilient water supply system. And in the years following the flood, the communities, most of the metro communities, the wholesale customers of Des Moines Waterworks, contributed capital. And in today's dollars, it would have been hundreds of millions of dollars that they contributed. That capital was used to build new facilities, 2 additional water treatment plants, some aquifer storage and recovery wells, and a grid of pipelines that connect all of those facilities together and deliver water right to the front door of every community that Des Moines Waterworks serves. Next slide, please. So today we have a very resilient system. You can see the red boxes are water treatment plants. The black lines are the grid of large transmission mains that deliver drinking water to all of the customers of Des Moines Waterworks here in the metro area. Now, during the time that it took to build those facilities and in the time since then, the water demand in the suburbs has increased dramatically. And as Graham said, they are now consuming 60% of the water that the regional system produces. So it's not surprising that given an investment that would be measured in hundreds of millions of dollars, and given the growing water usage in the suburban communities, there's also been growing interest in regional governance, or having a seat at the table, being part of the decision-making process. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is not our first swing at this. We've tried it a couple of other times, but historically the concept was always to try to put a monetary value on the entire system, which was always measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. And then to ask other communities to buy in to that system. And that financial commitment was always the roadblock. They'd already committed millions and millions of dollars. They did not want to spend millions more for a seat at the table. And so they were actually starting to think about building their own independent facilities that would not be a part of the regional system. And that was not going to be good for anyone. And so, next slide, please. Not too awful long ago, 2017, 2018, discussion of regional governance started again in earnest. And all of the metro communities came together. There were numerous, more than a dozen open meetings where all of the communities provided input and got updates and talked about how this could work. Then there was a pandemic, and those meetings kind of stopped. But ultimately, it was the 3 board-managed water utilities in the metro, and that would be Des Moines Waterworks, in combination with West Des Moines Waterworks and Urbandale Water Utility. Representatives from those 3 utilities came together and really hammered out a framework that we believe can facilitate the development of a regional governance system for drinking water production here in the Des Moines metro area. A document was published in November of last year that sort of outlined those discussions and the framework. And in December and January, those 3 boards each passed a resolution that said they wanted to participate in the development of an agreement that would create Central Iowa Waterworks. And they invited all of the other communities in the metro to pass a similar resolution and join us at the table to create this agreement and develop Central Iowa Waterworks. Next slide, please. So what is Central Iowa Waterworks, or what would it be? Central Iowa Waterworks would be an overarching governmental entity with a representative board. Each community that joined would have a representative on that board. Each community that serves a population of over 100,000 would have 2 representatives. Right now that's just Des Moines, but we're growing, so we'll get there. And that board would have a very narrow scope of responsibilities that we'll talk a little bit about here in just a second. Central Iowa Waterworks would own all of the water produced. All the drinking water that's treated in the Des Moines metro area would be owned by Central Iowa Waterworks. So primarily water produced by Des Moines and West Des Moines, but also Altoona, Polk City, if they join, and possibly even Grimes, who's not currently a customer of Des Moines Waterworks, but they're considering participation. Central Iowa Waterworks would own all of the water. All of the communities that joined would agree to exclusively purchase water from Central Iowa and no one else. And that mutually exclusive agreement is what would give this entity standing. So own all the water, exclusive sales rights, and then a unified wholesale rate that would be charged to all of the communities who were members across the metro. Central Iowa Waterworks would have a fairly narrow scope of responsibilities, as I mentioned, related specifically to managing the available water resources, the source and treatment facilities, managing the contracts with the producers to produce the water that everyone needs, planning and coordinating the funding for expansion and growth of capacity in the metro, and then very importantly, setting that unified wholesale rate that everyone would pay across the metro. A couple of things that Central Iowa Waterworks would not do. Central Iowa would not replace any of the existing water departments or water boards in the metro. They would still exist, and they would continue to have responsibility for operation and maintenance of their local distribution systems, maintaining hydrants and valves, repairing water main breaks. They would continue to provide all of the local customer service. They would continue to send the bills and set the retail rates for their individual customers. So as Graham said, if you live in Clive, you get a water bill from Clive, you will continue to get a water bill from Clive. Central Iowa would very much be a wholesale organization, and the local water departments would continue to be the retail organizations. So let's talk a little bit about the financial model that is really the thing that has helped us get to this point. A couple of creative ideas that came out of the early discussions and work with some consultants who helped us. One is a concept that I would call reserve capacity, and I'll get into that here a little bit more in just a second. But reserve capacity is an important concept. The other important thing is remaining book value or depreciated value. And I know that you all know what that means, but I'll explain a little bit about how it has been used in this concept. As I said, historically there was a look at the total value of the system, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and who's going to pay what. But what we've realized is we're not trying to sell the assets to anyone. We need them, in fact, to deliver water to our own customers. We don't need to put a price on the assets, which we could never agree on anyway. But we didn't need to do that in the first place. What we're trying to do is create a shared ownership entity. And what we are bringing to the table that actually has value is the reserve capacity, or the extra capacity that still exists in our facilities. We can't sell what we're still going to use, so we don't need to worry about that. We need to look at the reserve capacity. And we came up with this concept of valuing the reserve capacity or the extra capacity based on remaining book value of the assets, or the depreciated value of the assets. We could never agree on how much they're really worth, but we can all go to our books and look up and see what the remaining book value is. And so can West Des Moines, and so can Urbandale. It just seemed to make some sense. So there's going to be a financial true-up at inception, and it's going to work something like this. For entities that bring more to the table in terms of capacity or assets than they use, they are going to receive in this financial true-up. And if they bring more in terms of that historic investment, those hundreds of millions of dollars, if they invested more than they use, they too will receive. If a community comes to the table a little short, they bring less to the table than they use, then they're going to contribute. And ultimately, we do a financial true-up that puts everyone on the same plane. Historic investment has been respected, need and demand is being considered, and everyone is on the same plane at the beginning, and we can all move together, forward together, all paying the same rate and all paying the same for our growth and expansion as we go forward into the future. Those are really the concepts that have gotten us over that financial hurdle and really make this possible. So coming to a conclusion here, there are a lot of benefits to regional governance of drinking water production. Some of them depend on who you are and kind of what you bring to the table, but some of them are sort of overarching and accrue to everyone. And those are listed here. First and foremost is best management of the available water resources. And Graham touched on this too. We are blessed in central Iowa with abundant water resources, but they are not infinite. They are not inexhaustible, and we need to manage them carefully, especially as we look to the future, if we want to ensure that everyone is going to have fair and equitable access to those resources. Financial equity is another important point. We know that the lowest total cost of water is to be achieved through regional cooperation, and the fairest and most equitable distribution of those costs is also available through regional governance and regional cooperation. In addition to shared risk and shared reward. Producing water is a risky business, especially if there's a drought or a flood or a water quality crisis. We can share the risk and the reward through regional cooperation. System resiliency, we talked a little bit about the existing system and how we have 3 treatment plants that all feed into one grid. We can build on that existing system to make an even more reliable, resilient system for the entire metro area. Representative governance, that's the obvious thing. That's what people want. They want a seat at the table. And then, of course, region-wide cooperative planning for growth and economic development. That's what we all want, is to make sure we have enough water to continue to grow. We're one of the fastest growing metro areas in the country. Our water needs are growing fast too. So last slide here is just to reiterate some of the timelines that Graham suggested. We have asked that all of the metro communities consider passing a resolution of participation in the first quarter, which will end next week. 10 of the 13 communities in the metro have already passed that resolution. 2 of the other 3 are considering it here near the end of the month. One, and it's a rural water system, is considering not participating for reasons that we can get into. They have perspectives that are different than most of the urban and suburban communities. During Q2 and Q3, we are planning to do public education events just like this. We're offering the opportunity for people to hear what we're doing, understand, and ask questions. During that same period of time, we will be working on the agreement. The Des Moines Waterworks Board authorized us to issue that agreement at the end of February. All of the communities have it, and as they pass their resolutions, they're beginning to read it and understand it. And in April, we will start having conversations with them about questions, comments, concerns, and we hope that by September 1st, we have a finished agreement or a final agreement that folks can start signing in September and in the 4th quarter. Our goal, and I think this is an aggressive goal, but our goal is to have Central Iowa Waterworks stood up by the 1st of January in 2023. After that, there'll be a lot of work to do. They'll have to seat their board, they'll have to hire an executive director. It's going to take months to actually get into operation, but we're hopeful that at some point in 2023 we will have a regional governance entity here in the Des Moines metro area for oversight of water production, drinking water production. So I think that's the last slide, but I would be happy to take questions if you have any. Yes.
You haven't talked much about the quality Has the quality improved since the passing of Bill Stowe?
The question is related to the water quality, and the question is, has the water quality improved since the passage of Bill Stowe? And the answer is absolutely not. Surface water quality in the state of Iowa is still a significant concern. Something that we as Des Moines Water Works have been working on for the entire 30 years that I've been here. We're continuing to work on that on a lot of fronts, but there are points of light on the water quality front, but there's a lot of work to do and a lot. There's a great science out there that shows us how it can be done, but there's not much implementation that's making it happen. So water quality has not improved. We do hope, and it's included in the agreement, that the regional board will continue to work on improving surface water quality in the state of Iowa and will take a meaningful role in that issue. Yes.
Will the new entity continue to own distribution pipes, or are those going to be turned over to each city?
Each city will continue to own its own local distribution system. So the water mains that are in each street and provide water to each home and business, those will continue to be owned by Des Moines Water Works or the city of Clive or Urbandale Water Utility. The large diameter transmission mains, what we call our core network, the black lines that were on the graphic that I showed, ownership of those, as well as ownership of the bricks and mortar that treat the water, that will all transfer to Central Iowa Water Works. So there'll be a differentiation there. Source treatment and transmission is owned by Central Iowa. Local distribution will be owned by local communities.
You mentioned that we're lucky to have a lot of water in Iowa, but that it's not an infinite resource, and I know that we're one of the only countries that flushes our toilets with drinking water. Do you ever see that changing in the United States, or do you think we're too far deep to make that change?
We're pretty, okay, that was, and I forgot to repeat Doug's question, sorry. The question is, basically, we have water resources, but we flush our toilets with drinking water, unlike other countries, and do I see that changing? Well, not in my lifetime, I don't see changing, but we have, to your point, we're so deep into this, we have so much infrastructure that is set up to do it that way, that it would take dramatic change. What I do see potentially happening, and what is starting to happen in the United States and could potentially happen even in the Midwest, is water reuse, where they take the water that's been treated through the wastewater treatment plant and send it back to the front of the process, either put it in the river upstream of the intake or inject it into the ground up gradient from the drinking water wells. Actually having a parallel system or some sort of system that flushes toilets with gray water, I don't see that on a large scale, maybe on an individual home scale where someone would set up their washing machine to store water that could be used to, we see some of that. But I don't see it on a large scale, certainly not in the Midwest in the foreseeable future. Good question, thank you. Yes.
Some of the participant cities will have different rates of growth going forward. Just wondering, will there be a system in place for reallocating the participation cost in capital improvements, capital replacements over time based on those changes in usage in communities?
The question relates to the cost for growth, essentially, and how the cost for growth will be allocated. And that's a great question, and I will say this, that there are capital costs associated with running and maintaining existing facilities, and those will be shared costs. But as a community grows, and on a programmed regular basis, Central Iowa Water Works would be looking ahead and determining how much capacity needs to be built, how much expansion needs to be done. And each community will pay for that expansion outside of the unified wholesale rate. And they will pay a cost that's commensurate with the amount of growth they expect to see. So you can think of it in terms of growth will pay for growth. Now, we've agreed, or we've proposed, that the first 9% of growth-related costs would be shared by everyone to account for enhancements and efficiencies and technology that's a detail we don't need to get into, but the growing communities will pay for their own growth, basically. Let's go here first.
What's the estimated time for the true up until everybody's on the same level?
You know, what's the estimated time for the true up until everybody is on the same level? And the plan is that the true up will happen at inception. Some of the communities will owe $10 million at true up. It isn't expected that they will write a check for $10 million, but they may well have to bond for that initial payment. But the goal is that the true up is at inception. And so the communities that are going to contribute will have to fund that. The communities that are going to receive will have to decide how they want to receive that. There's some discussion about, well, maybe it could happen over 5 years, but it's going to be soon. It's going to be close to inception. Yes?
Do you see the Central Iowa Water Works expanding beyond the 13 communities that are involved?
Do we see Central Iowa Water Works expanding beyond the 13 communities that we're currently talking to? Yes. And the reason is that as we start to talk more about it and we start to do more presentations, other communities on the fringes are starting to come forward and say, hey, that seems like a great idea. How do we get in? The agreement that we've drafted includes provisions for adding new members. I will say this, the cost will be high. They're not going to get the same consideration as the founding members in terms of true up. They're going to have to pay their full freight to come on board, but we do expect that to happen. We do expect that to happen, and we've tried to address that in the draft of the agreement.
Well, just an update on where we're at from availability of water, and then as we went through last summer and a lot of press around that, how reduction in water use, how that played out.
Yeah, where do we stand with availability of water, and how did things play out last year when we were experiencing drought and did some, we requested conservation, frankly. In an average year, we're fine. You know, we have available water resources. We have plenty of water to meet the day-to-day demands. Our big challenge is lawn water, and when it gets hot and dry, people want to water their lawn as much as they want, whenever they want. The messaging that we issued last year was, please help us out by programming your lawn water on an odd, even schedule and avoid Mondays. We didn't see significant reduction in demand, but we did see our peak day shift from Monday, which is historically always clearly our highest demand day, to Wednesday. So we think people were listening, and they were changing the behavior enough to do some of their watering later in the week, but we still see significant demand. Our maximum day is around 100 million gallons per day, and on that day, we believe that 30 to 40 million gallons of that water is going on grass. I'm not a big lawn waterer, but we make a lot of money on lawn water. I'm not telling you not to do it, but please do it wisely. There will be a day when we'll have to manage lawn watering, because there are no other options in central Iowa for a community this size other than the rivers and the water that's coming down the river. That's getting to be so variable. We've seen really low river flows the last couple of years. Water reuse is a possibility. Deep wells, not an option. Piping water from the Mississippi, not an option. We're gonna have to live within our means long term, but right now, I think we're okay.
So with having reservoirs of water and the CIWW overseeing this, if an outside entity comes in and says, hey, I'd like to buy your reservoir of water, is there going to be a checks and balance system to say, no, we don't want to sell this reservoir of water, or does that kind of give you free rein to sell it to whoever?
Let me see if I can restate that in a way that I understand it. Given the water resources that we have available to us, if someone else comes along and wants to use those water resources, will Central Iowa Water Works have the authority or ability to sell those resources? I think that's the question,
Right.
basically.
Right.
First of all, Central Iowa, no drinking water entity governs water use in the state of Iowa. It's the Iowa Department of Natural Resources has responsibility for allocating water use here in the state of Iowa, which is a good thing. I will say that even when someone came to a different place in Iowa and tried to buy water in northeast Iowa and ship it to the southwest to alleviate drought, almost universally everyone in Iowa was infuriated by that concept. So I don't think Central Iowa Waterworks will have the authority to do that. I also don't think that there would be any interest in doing that. And I don't think creating the regional entity changes any of that calculus. And I hope that answered your
Yes.
question. Yes.
A separate but perhaps related question. It seems to me that the public water systems are broadly vulnerable to sabotage, chemical warfare, or whatever. Tell us what you can about what the industry is doing to address that very possibility.
Yeah, the question is, what is the drinking water industry doing to address the potential for sabotage? And I think you're talking about maybe contamination of the water. Yeah, the drinking water industry, just like the food industry or any industry that is related to things that we consume, is certainly there are vulnerabilities there. From the perspective of source water and monitoring the quality and the treatment process and monitoring that, we do an enormous amount of checking and monitoring and measuring every day. We literally have online instrumentation that watches for changes in water quality parameters that we won't get too deep into, but conductivity and pH and things that help us understand if there's something there that shouldn't be. So we're constantly monitoring. The second line of defense, I would say, is the robustness of our treatment process. So our treatment process has to treat the river, that river. And so it can remove a lot of things, and it's pretty protective. Can't remove everything, but it's fairly protective, and a lot of communities have pretty protective treatment processes. Once it gets out into the distribution system, the pipelines that are in every street in the community, it is vulnerable, frankly. One benefit of having such a large system and a large distribution network is that it would be difficult to contaminate 100 million gallons of water. You need a lot of a contaminant. But there are also monitoring stations out in the distribution system that help protect us. I'm gonna get the hook here. This is my favorite subject. You want me to take one more? Or you want me
One more.
Thinking about your community events, and I live and have business in Urbandale, so would I pay more, or would I pay less, or would I be the same? What you're thinking about those wholesale rates?
Yeah, my flippant answer to that is you'll always pay more. The rates always go up. But I will say this in all seriousness. We know that the total cost of water will be the lowest if we cooperate regionally. We know we can most fairly and equitably share costs if we cooperate regionally. Whether your individual costs will go up or down is really difficult for me to say. There's so many variables there. But the costs are the costs. This isn't going to dramatically increase the cost. It should share the costs equitably. And so what I would tell you is you'll pay a fair price for your water.
Thank you, Ted, for that presentation and your leadership around water in Central Iowa. We are donating a book in your honor through our Rotary Rosie Reader Band through the Des Moines Public Library Foundation. Last year, as we know, our Rotary Club Foundation donated $40,000 to purchase this band through our community grant program. Upcoming meetings. Here at Embassy Club, please think about somebody who might enjoy hearing one of our speakers and invite them to an upcoming meeting. Recall that you and any guests need to be registered by 9 a.m. on Wednesdays. Wednesdays. March 31st, Melissa O'Neill, Central Iowa Shelter and Services. She's going to talk about aquaculture and the greenhouse project. And then on April 7th, we have Ashley Mosen with the Des Moines Public Library. She is going to introduce the Rosie Reader Band, Rotary Rosie Reader Band. And April 14th, I know our program committee has something good in the works. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for being part of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. Thank you to our guests, Emily, Ryan, Rochelle, and Jennifer, for being with us today. Eric, officially welcome. And that's it for today. We are adjourned. See you next week.